Good morning and welcome to Infrastructure Matters. This is Krista Macomber and I'm joined with the wonderful Stephen Dickens. Good morning, Stephen. How are you this morning?
Yeah, I'm good. I don't know whether wonderful about describes it. I got home from about 11 o'clock last night
Yeah, yeah.
from Vegas, so my eyes are a little small and red this morning. So you're too kind with wonderful as always.
Well, I am right there with you. I pulled into my driveway at about 2 a.m., which was about 8 hours ago from San Francisco. So this is going to be the Weary Traveler episode.
And we're down to just two of us.
I
That's how bad it's been. We're thinning the herd.
I know, and we're missing Kimberly this week. But I know Stephen, with both of us on the road this week, certainly plenty to discuss. So I guess why don't we kind of get into it? So I know you were at Google Cloud Next this past week, as you mentioned, in Vegas, right? So I'd love to kind of hear from you, Stephen, who you met with at the show, and maybe kind of some key themes that that you heard in your conversations this week.
Yeah, so Google Cloud Next, this is the some company sort of flagship event, 30,000 people. It's becoming a huge show now, big expo hall. Got time with a whole bunch of execs. Regina Hashimi and the rest of the Google AR team do a fantastic job. There's about 120 of us analysts in a track for 2 days, and they were just feeding us the raw meat of executives. So got to spend time with TK, Thomas Kurian, the CEO, right through pretty much all of their leadership team. I think tons of announcements. Our team, we had, I think, 5 analysts. Our team's writing a whole bunch of research notes that'll drop probably by the time you've seen this podcast drop. I covered particularly what they were doing around some of the custom silicon and
Mhm.
also distributed cloud, which is their kind of on-premise device. But I mean, I'll start at a bit more of a sort of senior level, or a bit, and what I came away with is that Google's got a really good layer cake and architecture for their AI stack.
Okay.
It was really impressive how the entire organization, all of the presentations kept coming back to this same layer cake,
Mhm.
whether it was a Vertex or a Gemini story, whether it was a custom silicon story, whether it was a YouTube or a workspace or whatever it was, it came back to this layer cake diagram. And I was chatting to Brian Hall, who's their VP of marketing. And he was very humble, but I think he's the person who's kind of pulled all this together. What that means is the company's got a lot going on with AI, but you were, regardless of which part of the layer cake they were talking about, you were able to contextualize it and go, oh, this is adding value there. Oh, okay, I understand where it fits.
Sure.
From some of the other vendors I see in this space, it's kind of, they've thrown all of it at the wall. And yes, the product manager's telling you about their piece, but it's hard to really understand where it fits.
Yeah.
So I think that's going to make it interesting for Google as they go to market. It's going to make it easier for their customers to understand it, their partners to understand. So that was the kind of big takeaway. The second big takeaway for me was Google's just got to hit the accelerator button when it comes pedal when it comes to sales. The company's got a good value prop now. They've got a good story. They're up to 30 billion of revenue in Google Cloud. They've just got to go, 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 go. I
Mhm.
think they're a product engineering company,
Mhm.
and they've got a lot of services as a business that are bought by consumers without much sales touch. They have really got to step up the enterprise sales kind of motion. Obviously, they do that, but I think the takeaway from me is product's good, story's good, sales execution. And some of the senior leaders that we spoke to talked about that. But I think for me, that's the big sort of thing I'll be watching for over the next couple of years. Can they hit that accelerator pedal on sales execution, build out those teams? Because I think the opportunity's there with public cloud, it's there with AI.
Yes.
They've got the brand permission to go have that conversation. They just need to be in front of more customers.
That's interesting. And so I imagine, Stephen, kind of as you mentioned, this comprehensive AI story, I imagine will be able to help them on that enterprise sales front. But as you sort of hear that story compared to, maybe Microsoft Azure, AWS, and kind of what they're doing there, understanding that for the other companies, it's maybe a bit more of kind of a point or fragmented story. But I guess what else from your perspective really jumped out as kind of being these are a couple of differentiators that they could really, kind of lean on to be able to, obtain that fuel, I guess, to be able to really, put the pedal to the floor, so to speak.
Well, I think the interesting thing, and I can't remember whether it was five services that have got over 2 billion users. They
Okay.
would. I saw one of the sessions where they're talking about YouTube. We all use YouTube. Trying to get your head around the scale of the data management and the data.
Hmm.
If you can apply Gemini and Vertex to YouTube data, you can apply it to any big data problem. So I think that the thing that kind of resonated for me is putting Gemini as part of G Suite and Gmail. They launched a new app
Hmm.
as part of G Suite called Vids. For create being able to apply Gemini and some of their AI to these huge, huge services really resonated for me. When you combine that then with what they're doing with TPU and all of the Gemini training is done on TPU, they've got a stack that says we can handle the biggest AI workloads you're going to see.
Hmm.
And we can do that, and we can come all the way down through the stack with some of the large language models, some of the tooling, right down into custom silicon. They launched Axion this week, which is their sort of Graviton competitor.
Okay.
That's going to be interesting, an announcement with ARM around a custom processor.
Hmm.
So that's going to be interesting to see. So I think up and down the stack, scale, expertise, and some of the infrastructure. I think the only thing that's left for me is to just see them grow market share.
Sure.
And yes, they're going to take that from AWS and from Microsoft. So I mean, I think the solution's there. They've just got to execute on the sales side.
Makes sense. And I would not be me if I didn't ask you, did they talk at all about security? Whether it be, securing these infrastructure components that are going into the stack that's delivering applications, or whether it be any sort of, you know, add-on, services or tools for customers for securing their AI applications. And I ask this because in early June, in just a couple months, I'll be at Reinforce, which is AWS, their security conference every year. And I know last year they kind of talked to both ends of those spectrums, from what AWS is doing and also how they're empowering their customers for security. And I'm anticipating that they'll even double click down this coming year on AI applications and use cases. So just interested if they talked at all about that.
Yeah, they talked about Mandiant. I think they're not looking at it as a bolt on. It's now foundational to
Hmm.
everything they're doing. They talked a lot about the security of the overall cloud platform and how they've really focused in. I presented on availability. You get the impression that they're really architecting the back end. One of the FinOps ladies was presenting. So I think, and I wasn't in the security sessions,
Okay.
but I got the impression from some of the executive sessions they are really focused in at all layers of that back end infrastructure and making it secure.
Sure.
It'd be interesting to get some feedback from them, and maybe we should get you better briefed if you're not
Yeah.
on the Mandiant story for Gemini,
Hmm.
because that'd be really interesting. But as I say, some of the general sessions they talked about security up and down the stack as just vital. Where those LLMs are coming from. As you pull them in, that's an attack surface area. You bring them into the system. These are new workloads for a lot of clients, and obviously there's a challenge there. One of the sessions was talking about, how threat actors have also got access to AI. It's not just enterprises.
Mhm.
So new tools, new attack surfaces.
Sure.
It's a continual race and as hamster wheel, as you know, to keep ahead of the bad actors.
It is a relentless, relentless journey, shall
Yes,
we
for
say?
sure.
Yep. And unless there's anything else, even on Google Cloud Next,
Lots to see from our analyst team. There was I didn't. Keith Kirkpatrick's going to cover Vids. That's a
okay.
new app in the G Suite for creators and
Mhm.
video work. There was stuff coming out around storage that I know Camberley and Mitch are going to be writing about. There was a lot going on in the app dev space that Paul Nashwadi's going to be writing about. So, I mean, I've just literally given you the thinnest slither, but there's lots to talk about. Huge show.
I'm sure. So we'll definitely have to stay tuned, as you mentioned, over the next week or two for some of that continued coverage. And if
Hmm.
anybody has any specific questions, any listeners, we'd love to see them kind of dropped in the comments and things like that. We love kind of that feedback. Um,
I did remember though that we launched some availability research. It wasn't with Google, but we took the opportunity to launch it at Google. So that's looking at the three hyperscale cloud providers. Mitch
okay.
Lewis and myself on our team have been digging deep into the availability um, from the big three cloud providers over 2023. So we just published a report that went live on Wednesday. So
Oh, excellent.
recommend people check that out. We'll maybe put a link in the
Mhm.
show notes.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That'll be great to check out.
Hmm.
Um, yeah. So, and that might be a good segue into the event that I was at this week, which was it was a fun one. It was Security Field Day. So, for any of our listeners that are maybe not familiar, so Futurum Group, we acquired the Tech Field Day team. Actually, the acquisition, I believe, closed last week. I believe it was announced several months ago, but this is a really interesting event. We cover, as you know, Stephen, we cover a whole variety of topics within the kind of the Tech Field Day program. So again, this one this week was on security, but we have, I know, Stephen, I believe you wrote the one for cloud, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, there's App Dev Field
Yep.
Day coming up.
Yeah.
There's a whole schedule, I think, for the rest of the year.
Yeah, we have networking and mobility, and the format essentially is we invite um, vendors to come in that participate within that particular space to give effectively a 90-minute pitch to what we call our team of delegates. So now that Tech Field Day is part of the Futurum Group family, we're having Futurum Group analysts sit in on this panel of delegates, but the delegate panel is some really, really smart people, practitioners that are living and breathing within the space. So they're able to kind of come in and give some very, pointed, very smart and insightful questions. These presentations are streamed live and they're also available after the fact. So also in the show notes, we can make sure for anyone that's interested, we can make sure that we link to that. So it was just a really interesting format and kind of just a different event to really participate in. And I'm looking forward to participating in others. So for
So
security,
which vendors were at this one this week?
yeah,
Chatting to you off camera, there was four or five that kind of stood out for you.
there,
Who was there this week, and kind of
yeah,
what were the highlights, I suppose?
absolutely, yeah, Stephen. So there was four companies that we had present this week. So we had Aryaka Networks, we had Zerto, which is now part of
Hmm.
HPE. We had Palo Alto Networks, and we also had Index Engines. So it was a really interesting kind of collection of companies. Obviously, Aryaka coming at the topics from more of kind of a network perspective, kind of Zerto coming at it from kind of more of a data protection perspective. Index Engines also coming from a very data centric perspective, and from Palo Alto Networks, they sort of bridge kind of network security and sort of a data security story. So I'll give kind of a quick flyby on each company.
Hmm.
I won't go into too much detail just because it would be much longer than we have time for on this podcast. And I do plan to write a short research note on each of these that will be coming out similar to our Google Cloud Next research over the next couple of weeks. But really, kind of some of the general themes were, data security really being kind of at the forefront and finding new ways to not only make data sort of, available for recovery, but also, really kind of get insights into where there are some threats in our environment to be able to be remediated, and also really kind of getting broader intelligence across the environment and really kind of making it automated and enforceable. Um, so for Aryaka, that latter point was sort of a big piece of their presentation. They talked about their not only kind of their SD-WAN capabilities, but also their unified SASE capabilities, which stands for Secure Access Service Edge. But really, how they're sort of trying to integrate these capabilities to provide not only kind of a network backbone, but also, again, that observability and intelligence across that backbone, and to be able to do things like automate policies for access control for packets as they're being delivered, for example.
That's
Um,
that's the what key word for me out of there. Automate. I mean, I sort of
mhm.
see the ops side from a sort of compute and infrastructure. These teams have just got alert fatigue. There's just so much coming at them. So
Yeah.
the ability to automate and sort of drive that through is crucial. Was that the same sort of theme coming through on the network side?
I would say so. Yep, yep, absolutely. And the team from Aryaka, I highly recommend folks listen to that session. They did a fantastic job, not only of kind of setting out their vision, but also the demos and answering the questions. For this audience, it was a big, a kind of a big push for the demos and really kind of wanting to see the technology in action. So we got to
Hmm.
see my Aryaka, and not only kind of that single pane of glass perspective, but also, as you mentioned, kind of getting some of those insights across the environment and the automation too. So it was a really a cool interactive session. And again, I do recommend folks listen to it.
The one I'm interested in, we spent some time with Zerto over in Boston a few months
Yep.
back.
Yep. Um,
Obviously now part of HPE, kind of coming from that sort of data protection space, which I
yeah.
know you cover better than anyone. I mean, what was the key takeaways there?
Yeah, the overall kind of pitch was around resiliency from ransomware. And I would say there was two key things that they really talked about. One
Hmm.
was they have what they call their cyber resilience vault, which is essentially looking to provide, immutable data copies, looking to be able to provide as much of kind of an isolated environment as possible,
Hmm.
through kind of, through replication into the vault of this kind of immutable data, to be able to kind of have those data copies available for recovery. So that was kind of one thing they talked about, but also they talked about their journaling capabilities and how they can use this journal to be able to provide analytics that could detect that an attack is happening. And we're
Hmm.
seeing this really across the data protection space. So Zerto, they compete against some more traditional replication capabilities, but also increasingly kind of your backup software vendors of the world. So for Zerto, kind of their pitch is being able to detect the attack in near real time because their journal is capturing, those very finite points in time. And
Yep.
then also to be able to very quickly recover once the attack is able to be occurred. So it's
Roll
kind
back
of
to a known point, basically.
exactly. Yep.
Yeah,
So
makes
it's
sense.
kind of, we talk about RTO, which is recovery time, and RPO, which is recovery point, which effectively is your downtime and your data loss. So kind of their thing is being able to try to mitigate both of those things.
Makes
Um,
sense.
yep. So as you mentioned, Stephen, we work closely with that team, and I've been really keen to kind of see some of those analytics capabilities in action. So that was really interesting. Um,
The other big one that stands out for me is Palo Alto. They're one of the
yes.
behemoths in this space. I mean, I've been sort of watching them from. I've got a really dear friend of mine who works for them in the UK that I caught up with when I was back there socially. But so I'm kind of tracking them a little bit. But that's a massive company in this space, one of the biggest.
Yes. Yeah. They're a massive company, and I would say they're certainly branching out technology wise these days. And one thing that this team highlighted in particular, which is very near and dear to my heart, was they made an acquisition last year of a company called Dig Security. And Dig Security plays in the market for what we call data security posture management, DSPM. Stephen, we talked about this last on our last episode with Camberly. So,
Hmm.
from my perspective, I really wanted to know, okay, this is a company that kind of does, you know, next gen firewalls, and they do kind of threat identification and things of that nature. So for me, I kind of wanted to know, okay, what's the value of this kind of a technology in the hands of Palo Alto? Because I've been hearing more from kind of the data protection vendors, right? So for data security posture management, it's a lot of getting insight into things like the sensitivity of the data. And kind of what we call, some of the data lineage as well. So for Palo Alto, their security pitch is being able to kind of secure, they call it code to cloud. So they're really looking to kind of secure really across the application lifecycle. And they have something called Prisma Cloud that it really sounds like they're going to be integrating the Dig technology into. And so, similar to what we were talking about with Aryaka for Prisma Cloud, it's trying to give this centralized visibility and control across the environment. But what Dig is going to be able to do is really provide insight into kind of how to protect the data. So they gave a couple of examples. One could be, for example, the ability to use Prisma Cloud with Dig to not only see if like a web application firewall is connected to sensitive data, but also does it have access to that data? I thought
Hmm.
that was a really great example. Or, for example, looking at an EC2 instance and not only being able to identify, okay, is there some overly privileged access to the EC2 instance, but also does that EC2 instance have maybe access to an RDS database that has sensitive data in it? So it's for security teams that are getting just inundated these days, and IT teams as well, but security teams in particular that are getting inundated with these insights and alerts. It really makes it more actionable and it helps them to prioritize what to focus on. So
And that's what I'm just hearing. I mean, there's so much coming at these teams.
mhm.
Sorting the signal from the noise
Yeah,
is the crucial piece, I
yeah.
think.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So that was a really interesting pitch. And then just again, the other shout out I would give is Index Engines. They were, our final, but certainly not our least presenter. And they talked about their CyberSense capability, which they just launched the 8.6 version of it this
Mhm.
past week. And we actually had the opportunity to work closely with Index Engines for a validation that we did in collaboration with a partnership that they have with Dell. And what's interesting about Index Engines is they're not quite in the data security posture management space, but what they are is they are more in kind of I would say kind of the threat intelligence almost. So they are not only doing things like looking at, maybe anomalous activity within
Mhm.
the data environment to detect an attack is occurring, but they can actually look at the contents of files as well and inspect the contents of the data itself.
Mm.
And what that does is it gives greater confidence. So they talk about a 99.5% confidence in their ability to detect an attack. And we press them on this They gave us some really great information that's reflected in the report that we created for them. And they also talked about it in the presentation, which was yesterday morning. So we'll make sure to link to those pieces of information as well. But really, that's kind of their play, is they collaborate closely with, your your Dells, your Infinidats, or IBMs of the world to sort of bring that added value from that perspective for cybersecurity.
Sounds like you've had an interesting week.
It was very interesting. And I know, Stephen, we had one more event this week that we wanted to talk about before we run out of time here, which was our Mainframe Summit, right? That we hosted this week.
Yeah, yeah. So, interesting week for the mainframe. Just in general, we had the 60th anniversary of the mainframe that happened last Sunday. That was April 7th. On April 8th, we hosted our mainframe 60th summit. Highly recommend everybody checks those sessions out. We'll put a link in the show notes. Big week for the mainframe as well. I mean, whilst we were recording last week's episode, there was an earthquake in the New York area, 4.8 on the Richter scale. It was actually whilst we were recording last week's
Yes.
show. So
Yep.
I don't know whether you see my screen wobble at one point,
Right.
but I kind of came off the podcast. The test manager I know, PJ Catalano, put a note out on X talking about we've got a free earthquake test of the 200 mainframes that are in the test floor there. So I went down the rabbit hole. I know they earthquake test those to sort of one of the NEB standards. So there's a research note coming out, I think, today that talks about what that happened. The other sort of news this week in the mainframe space was IBM closed out its IntelliMagic acquisition. We've got some research coming out that we're doing on that. So this is a bit of a preview for that. But I think, really good week for the mainframe, surviving an earthquake last Friday, going through its birthday on the Sunday, our mainframe summit on the Monday, and then the IntelliMagic acquisition being sort of announced. So there's a lot going on in the mainframe space. I got some time this week with Google talking about mainframe and what they're doing. So digging into that a little bit, which was really interesting. So as I say, the the mainframe space continues to be probably more vibrant than I've ever seen it, which is crazy.
It's very interesting, and I always have to laugh if anybody ever says, the mainframe is dying or dead. I'm like, okay, how many more decades is that going to take, right?
Yeah.
Which, as
We've been
all of us
eating those words since '95, I think.
have,
Yeah,
right?
it's crazy,
Yeah,
but no, I mean, lots going on in the space.
yeah.
Lots of M&A activity. We've
Hmm.
seen BMC by Model 9. We're seeing um, the assets that were part of Micro Focus then dropped into OpenText for a hot minute, and then being acquired by Rocket. A lot of acquisition activity. This IntelliMagic piece kind of, we saw Astadia get bought by Amdocs. There's a lot going on, a lot of M&A. So I don't think we've seen the space this vibrant in a while.
It's awesome. It's all good. It's all good.
It's all good. It keeps me busy.
Yeah,
Keeps me in gainful employment. Let's put it that way.
exactly, exactly.
Lots to cover.
All right. Well, on that note, we are unfortunately out of time, but please make sure to, like us and subscribe and all of your favorite methods of getting your podcasts, all your favorite platforms, and leave us comments. Please interact. We'd love to kind of hear from you, what you want to hear about. Certainly we want to make this engaging. And with that, thank you so much as always, Stephen. And we look forward to connecting with everyone on the next episode.
Bye bye.
Thank you.